We banned vaping, shisha. The logical next step is to ban smoking, right? So why do we not ban smoking?
Post-COVID, I see people who are addicted to the alcohol hand cleaner. Every time they get into the reception, go into the lift, they must pump.
People have always had vices. You cannot run away from that. It's part of human nature. But there's so many things reshaping how you operate within those vices. There's new technology that comes in, brings in the opportunity for you to use your mobile phone, for instance, to access all kinds of new things and also get a lot of information and order a lot of devices. So it's so many different things going on that we felt it's important to try and understand what's going on in the world and try and also understand how other countries are doing certain things. This topic, it's hard to put a bad habit down. It addresses sort of the human behavior that has been with us since the dawn of man, right? It's habitual behavior, and it runs against society's values, and is potentially harmful to the individual as well. So what we would like for today's session is to share some of the knowledge. We've got a group of panelists who are quite varied in where they come from and in the areas that they're involved in. So if you look at the vices that we know know drinking, there's drugs, there's gambling, there's gluttony, sins of the flesh, binge shopping, collecting too many things. But with the advent of technology, many of these vices have become amplified. And new ones have emerged, things like device addiction, and I think that's one of the things that I consider as one of my vices. I cannot keep the mobile phone too far away from me. Things like vaping, for instance, that's also something which is relatively new, and it's staggering because in 2023 it is a US $28 billion industry, and by 2030 it's expected to be US $185 billion. Vaping was banned in Singapore in 2018, and is banned in more than 30 countries. But then you read reports about primary school students vaping. And so what are the countermeasures? So that's where our panel comes in.
A key principle of public policy is that, number one of the key principles is equity or equitability is not the same as uniformity. The second key point about public policy is that it must provide people with a range of options and give people at least a sense that they are in control of their lives. The third very important factor is you need to allow individuals equal access to a better life, the opportunity to have a better life. The government of the day, the responsibility is not just to cater to the vast majority's needs, it's also to cater to the interests of small pockets of society. And especially in today's world, right? It's no more as simple as the majority.
I mean, in general, I think the government does things for the benefit of people. Makes the best possible decisions and takes the best possible practices and applies them. Is that so in this case?
I think a lot of it started with the WHO guidance, which was quite unequivocal, quite clear, right, that cessation is the only way. Do not get distracted by other sort of alternatives. focused on cessation, and the signatories had to abide by it. So we have been traditionally going in that direction. It's cessation or nothing else. But that was before these alternatives became viable. Today, there are all these alternatives. You know, e-cigarettes is just one. There are different alternatives, right? But all of them cause significantly less harm to health. WHO has also softened its stance. But Singapore has continued to hold on to that. England has softened its position. Japan is amazing. You know, Japan has legalized it, the alternatives, vaping and so on, and they've seen a phenomenal drop in smoking. New Zealand is the first country in the world that's officially declared smoke-free, less than 5%. And all of them, whether it's coincidence or otherwise, you can argue, all these countries saw these differences, this difference taking place only when they liberalized the policy. Liberalization doesn't mean it's irresponsible. It's a regulated opening up of the system. It's still regulated.
Regular cigarette smokers, then they switched to vaping, and then they went back to cigarettes. And I always ask these three guys, I said, why? So they said, with vaping, you don't stop. You just, because you don't sense it or people don't sense it, you're at it all the bloody time. But with smoking cigarettes, you have to make an effort. And so it's much easier for us to control consumption with smoking a raw tobacco cigarette rather than vaping. Interesting perspective. I mean, this is anecdotal, but it's an interesting perspective.
It's very reflective of what my clients say. So when you smoke a cigarette, there is an end to it, like a physical end to it. Whereas in a vaping device, it's only when the pod is fully consumed, then you change to another pod.
Isn't
Correct?
that a lot like binge watching and binge anything? You just keep on doing it.
But
You
there is
watch
an end to
Netflix.
binging. If you binge watch a series, there is an end somewhere.
Oh, but then Netflix will feed you something else to watch, and then you'll hook onto that.
Yeah, but it's different. But you see, it's a prolonged one. There's no break. You can keep going.
Vaping, it's a second process many times. That you're binge watching and you're vaping. You don't stop vaping because you're reading or because you're working. That's the issue.
My stance on harm reductions is it's not really about vape e-cigarettes. It's more of the heated tobacco products, because vapes, if you read in the newspapers, there are incidents of impurities, chemicals that really provide a lot of harms for the human body. Whereas for heated tobacco products, it is mainly just tobacco, right? Rather than all the flavoring. It's basically a very different category of alternative nicotine delivery systems. Japan actually banned e-cigarettes, but they allowed heated tobacco products. And because of that, since 2014, when the products made available in a regulated manner, the smoking prevalence has actually dropped quite significantly.
Less than 1% of youth have taken up heated tobacco products in Japan.
I haven't read evidence or journal articles that talk about the gateway effect. What I do see among the clients that I work with, especially the very young ones, there's a group that was smoking and eventually they moved to vapes. And now that there's a group that are on vapes and they've never touched a cigarette. And then there's another group that start with vapes and end up using both at the same time. Cigarettes was always an issue. That's why I had that 10-year-old kid who was caught smoking. It's because of the accessibility of these devices that make it feel more possible for them to try something new, especially with the perception that it is less harmful than combustion cigarettes. So if we were to regulate it or to allow these devices or these alternatives into Singapore in any way, it really has to be very, very carefully thought through. It has to be based on very, very clear rules and principles, one of which there have to be rules in place to control the accessibility of these things to youth. You have to know what's inside all these things because we actually don't know. And most of the people that I see don't trust what they see on the label, but they have no choice because they want to use those devices.
You challenge the norm, by taking the alternative to an extreme. So why not ban cigarettes? We banned vaping, shisha. The logical next step is to ban smoking, right? So why do we not ban smoking? I can tell you for sure it's not because of a potential drop in revenue. Because the amount of money you collect from duty and excise is nominal. So that is clearly not the motivation for keeping this going. So let's force the issue. Why not ban tobacco smoking altogether? Some countries have tried. Bhutan is an example. They tried and failed abysmally. So if you take that hardline position, Singapore government has banned many things, right? So why not ban tobacco? What is the difference between banning vaping and banning tobacco?
If the government do take such drastic measures, I'm sure, you know, the next day there will be a super huge black market out there. You get riots, black market, you know, people will be making tons of monies from just smuggling in, that kind of thing. These are also
There'll
practical.
probably be a lot of people going across the causeway.
So isn't the point I'm making isn't that the crux of the issue? It is like anything else, a form of addiction. And therefore you take away the source. That's the way we've been dealing with addiction. Take away the source. Pragmatism. So there are various other things that are all pragmatic. Basically saying, this is human nature. Don't go against human nature. Jive with it. Public policy jives with human nature. That's how you have sustainable policies. That has worked. In my view, the tobacco policy is a significant departure from this cadence approach.
I was working in Singapore Airlines when we banned smoking on all flights, but progressively. Japanese flights last. We gained a lot of new flyers who would choose us because all flights were non-smoking. So back to Dr. Matthew Lee's point, is that the government can try to ban smoking in total, same as we ban chewing gum and vaping, and we would win new friends. We are not about to have a group of people protest and then we lose people. So there will be some wins, there will be some losses.
What about the black market issue?
What about the black market issue then for prostitution and for chewing gums and many other things, right? So that one, deal with it as it happens. But right now, it is just contradictory that you ban vaping rather than provide it as an alternative, and yet you're not willing to go the whole hog to ban cigarette smoking. I don't think that checking your handphone every day is an addiction, or every 20 minutes, because it has become a social norm, so we don't call it addiction anymore. Somebody who is addicted to bullshit and glorifying himself is an addiction too, but we don't call it an addiction. So maybe there's some need now for redefining our conversation today.
It's fairly loose and open just for this purpose, to allow different views to percolate, right? I mean, if you talk about addictions and look at gambling. Gambling is only a problem if you're losing money, right? If you're winning, that's not a problem. Carry on.
Interesting factor here is substitution effect, right? Which is an economic concept. Substitution effect. So, in the last 5 years, the smoking rate in Singapore dropped from 12% to 8.8%, which is the biggest dip ever, you know, in such a short space of time. And I suspect, I have no evidence, I mean, no research evidence for this, but I suspect that this has to do with the alternative, the substitution effect of vaping.
If I can just intercept, I mean, you don't have to suspect, it's actually published. Yeah, so a lot of us, I mean, for this case, a lot of smokers actually switch to the alternative. It can be the, you know, e-cigarettes, the vapes, right? Or it could be the heated product. So they actually did studies, 6,000 participants, and the top 1 and 2 reasons because they want something healthier, safer, relatively healthier, sorry. And second is they want to reduce the secondhand smoke.
We talk about the joys of addiction, but we haven't really talked about the other forms of addiction. Why are we addicted? I think we also are addicted because of the pains in our life, and that's not even being acknowledged enough. And I say that from the perspective as a prison counselor. I spent the last 2 years talking to drug addicts, all the way from those who have just served 1 year to all the way to those served 20 years. And I'm hearing stories about their addictions, and I think no one's talking about this enough, and I'd like to share that with you today. It's never about the high. It's never about the shockness. There's a common story in all the families that have been destroyed. The addiction is really not about the addiction. The addiction is about the pain. And what is the common pain that I'm hearing? 2 things. Loneliness and the pain of not feeling belong. They're kind of interconnected. So if that is loneliness that we are experiencing, including the children, who I think are experiencing a sense of loneliness too, the sense of high that they get is really an escapism, and they're running away from that pain. They're running away from their loneliness. And these are topics that are very difficult to engage in. And because I'm trained as a counselor, I'm able to navigate these difficult conversations. But when it comes to the policymakers, people who are approaching this topic from a very pragmatic approach, where does the loneliness and the emotions and all the unspoken traumas and pains, how does it come into the picture when you make policies? Because this is a growing problem. You're looking at the newspaper reports that the young are getting addicted even at 9 years old now. And this problem is only getting bigger. And we have to approach it from a more emotional perspective. And I can tell you one more thing about the stories that I hear from the prisons. There are many families that are broken. The family system in Singapore is completely broken.
When I was doing my full-time national service, that was a time when, some of you may know, it was tremendous, it's a peaking of drug addiction in Singapore. And most of the drug addicts were in the camps, national service military camps. I was part of a team that wrote a paper on that, and one of the things that stood out for me was when we interviewed all the drug addicts and the parolees, would you take drugs again? The answer was no, we will try our best not to. Why wouldn't you take drugs? Because we didn't want to go into detention. When you go for quick fix policy making, you forget the social dimension surrounding the problem. You want to bring the statistic down. You want to demonstrate that we can reduce the number of drug addicts, or reduce the number, or we can incarcerate more. Either way, you're demonstrating that you're effectively tackling the problem. But the downside risk with that is you get the outcome through crude intervention in the form of fines, right? Or in the form of incarceration. So in the end, the primary reason why they didn't want to go back to drugs is not because drugs are bad, is because I didn't want to get caught and go into detention. So a lot of the policies that we are talking about today, James, I think we are not, I'm talking about social policies. They're not looking at the negative externalities of that policy implemented, as implemented. But when you look at, for example, when you incarcerate someone, what happens to the family unit? Those issues must surface. So when you go after someone who can't quit but has no alternatives, that person goes through a struggle, and that has an emotional impact on the family. So I would urge the government or policymakers in general to factor the emotional dimension and the consequences of some, and not just the immediate outcome, which is KPI driven.
It's very similar to what I see when I volunteer in the prisons and I speak to inmates as well. A lot of them regret taking drugs because affected their family and their life. So they are now separated. It basically destroyed their family, okay, in their words. So drugs, vaping, cigarette smoking, it's like an iceberg, right? That's just what you see on the top, but underneath there's a lot of stuff going on. I think that the desires, the problems, the stresses, the troubles that people are facing are very similar. In some way it's stress, but the way that the manifestation of it is slightly different. And especially if we're talking about technology now, you have different devices that come to try to fix the same problems.
I don't think we are here to hit out at the government. That's not the intention. I think it's an appeal for the government or the people who are in a position to shape government and influence government to look beyond KPIs, to look at the human beings behind the numbers. It is so important for us to be a lot more humane in public policy. And it cannot be cause-effect, cause-effect. This problem is a problem on the spectrum. It is not a binary problem of right versus wrong.
If a person can totally quit nicotine, that's the best, but not everyone can. Yeah. And for that group of people, if we could find a less harmful option, that would be very interesting for me to know, purely from the perspective of wanting to help somebody in his long-term health. In pharmacy, people like to come and self-medicate, right? They come to the pharmacy, they buy things on their own, they come to the pharmacist, they speak to us, and we recommend some medications. Right now, people are still trying to fix their own problems, but their way of self-medication is now sometimes through these substances and devices. So everyone's just trying to fix a problem that they are facing, but through different means and ways that are accessible to them.
I think we should come from an angle of empathy and compassion, right? As a doctor, that is a big driver for me when I see my patients. Putting yourself in their positions. I think in this case, we also need to consider the views, the feelings of people who smokes. I think based on the data that we mentioned just now, a big percentage of smokers actually wanted to switch to a somewhat safer alternative and also reduce secondhand smoke. So I think that's something that we should put in more effort to understand their motivations, all this, and see how we can help in that aspect. And as a whole, I think if we have policy that made from the angle of compassion and empathy, the whole society wins.
So while everyone was trying to vape, I must have been the only idiot that continued with the cigarette smoking because I thought vaping was banned in Singapore. And I didn't want to have the ass luck of being caught. So I continued with the cigarettes, not knowing that vaping may be a bit more healthier to the cigarettes.
I don't think healthier is a word, but okay.
Maybe less harmful.
We like to use the term less harmful rather than healthier. Yes.
We covered everything from sex and drugs. Just haven't hit rock and roll that much, but I think a lot of what we deal with in life is about escapism.
Yeah.
We're trying to get away from the realities of what's smack in front of us. And that's changing all the time. The world's changing, new things are coming in, attitudes have to change, and I think policy making has to keep that in mind and also ride that wave and make sort of better decisions when it comes to trying to curb the ills of society. Right? Some things will always be there, new things will come. How do you moderate that whole process?